So to get it out of the way right now, I am a fan of PAW Patrol. A couple years back, I was channel surfing after a particularly challenging week, and I quickly got sucked into the void that is this franchise. I can't say I was following this series since I was a young pup, but let's just say I started watching before things got crazy in the show. And outside of it, for that matter. PAW Patrol is the story of a boy named Ryder and his assembly of puppies that double as an advanced group of rescue and emergency service personnel. They primarily serve the small seaside Canadian town of Adventure Bay, where they're called in for the most and least important issues imaginable, and eventually get called out of town for missions and more cinematic adventures. For the past 6 years, PAW Patrol has been leading the pack in television ratings, merchandising sales, and general preschool popularity. It's new Coke, and there's a lot of likability to this series, but I think many have a love-hate relationship with it. It either serves as its saving grace to your productivity, or it is the bane of your existence. Regardless of its actual effect on the populace, people love to talk about it. The amount of future conspiracy theorists that this one show has spawned is a bit baffling, but that's partially what we're here to talk about. So today, I'd like to explore the main catalyst for PAW Patrol existing, whether it's helpful or harmful, what makes it likable or not, and why some are convinced that it's communist propaganda meant to infiltrate the next generation. Before we jump in, here's a mini thesis that justifies me talking about PAW Patrol for 20 minutes. Now, there's something to be said about the audience it caters to and the excuse tethered over at any time and a greater discourse evolves from it. The phrase, "it's for kids," is pretty much used to disarm anyone getting hyped up over anything considered childish and lame, but most especially for animation. Double that whenever preschool series of any kind are involved. The assertion that you cannot think about or discuss animation in a serious or mature manner is obviously silly, but because the medium is still largely considered for kids, it stops many from sharing in discourse of the series, or even worse, watching them from an objective standpoint, if not altogether. Of course, once people have absorbed this message, they continue to assert this onto others, and the cycle, unfortunately, continues. So on one side of the spectrum, you've got storming theorists who believe that PAW Patrol is the downfall of structured Western civilization, and on the other you have these goobers dismissing every critique of the phenomenon with, "it's for kids, it doesn't have to be like this." To be fair, there are times where this argument can be utilized in a valid way, mainly to separate our discourse on cartoons for the younger fare to increase our understanding of them. To me, the bare minimum criteria a cartoon needs to do to succeed is to be engaging or entertaining. As a medium that makes literally anything possible, the central message or story communicated should be able to grip the audience and elicit an emotion out of them. More often than not, preschool cartoons are meant to be edutainment, if not mostly or wholly educational. Many successful preschool animated series achieve a balance of fun and format and find a way to captivate and thoroughly compel their viewers into action. They don't all have to be fake interactivity, but they have to have some kind of hook. Sesame Street and Dora the Explorer are fundamentally different beasts, but they did manage to achieve very similar successes. Now, in the cartoon community, a lot of vastly different types of series are looked at within the same lens. Fact is, preschool cartoons are not the same. They're not made or marketed the same way, and they deserve a different perspective of which to judge them. Comparing Bubble Guppies to Ed, Edd n Eddy doesn't provide much valuable insight into either show, because the former was made with a top-down curriculum in mind, while the latter was made out of nostalgic leanings. Also, it was made on a dare. Like literally.
Coming up with the Eds was a big dare. Somebody dared me to make a kid's show.
We can't really say that all cartoons hit the mark, and the same can be said for preschool series. Historically speaking, when they do hit the mark, they hit it right out of the park into the next state. When they miss the mark, they definitely seem to be more adventurous at times than animated selections from the big three. Personally, I found myself a bit more open to channel surf on Disney Junior at one point than I would on its older counterpart, because I know what kind of reputation they have. So, what kind of standard can you hold PAW Patrol to? While on a technical level, it's definitely fine. The character animation is solid, and the backgrounds are barren looking but well articulated. At most, Adventure Bay might have like 20 people living there at one time, but it seems like every other set is also sparsely populated. The music utilizes the same few familiar tracks, unless a new special comes out, of which the new material takes on a more complex and rich sound. The voice acting is also fine. It's up to pure perspective to determine how grating it can be, especially from certain characters. In terms of acting ability, everyone does a serviceable job. On a narrative level, the stories, especially early on, follow a very strict format. Very rarely do they step outside of that with a longer runtime, and even during various specials, they only keep it to 11 minutes typically. The tone of the series started out as bog-standard preschool fare with an unflappable happy-go-lucky disposition loaded to the brim with relevant wordplay and puns.
Hey, I've been double rubble bubbled!
Around season 4 or 5, the show became a bit more serious and edgy, but at its core, it's still PAW Patrol. Overall, it's okay, definitely not my first pick to win an Emmy, but certainly not bad either. I think a lot of the salt comes from the fact that PAW Patrol is a billion-dollar juggernaut. While it took nearly 20 years for SpongeBob to make Viacom an estimated $13 billion, it took PAW Patrol a third of that time to generate half as much. They've dipped their grubby little paws in every medium imaginable and ran with it. Their live stage show tour was so successful that they began another one before the first one was even finished touring. As per new developments in the show, they keep adding special classifications of accessories and toys and show no signs of stopping. I'm sure a lot of people found this to be an unprecedented development. However, I'm here to tell you that it's anything but, really. See, this might surprise you, mostly because there's no indication of this off the bat, but PAW Patrol was created from the ground up to make money.
What? No!
Once upon a time, a Canadian toy company, Spin Master, was getting by producing toys like Air Hogs and Aquadoodle. They eventually got around to this little thing called Bakugan, and the higher-ups realized that TV's an entity you want in your corner when you're trying to sell toys. So they made a division of the company just for entertainment products and eventually commissioned the creator of Bob the Builder to create a show that involved transformation based on his proposal about rescue dogs. It was far from the only competitive proposal given to them, but the reason why the idea scored brownie points was because of the perception that transforming toys were only made for older boys. And with this new idea, it had the potential to appeal to both genders, and so they got to work developing this idea. But as time went on, more attributes were changed to make it more toyetic. In order to get Nickelodeon on board with distribution and production, they added and subtracted narrative and aesthetic elements to make subtle changes to the audience's perception of the program. And before we knew it, the series made its official debut on national television. Now, understandably, a lot of people at the very least are put off by this revelation. Considering what series made for young kids we hold with high regard in our culture, it seems pretty rare to just see something do it for the money and succeed. Some feel like, to this end, they're making the product haphazardly because there's no regard for an educational component. Ironically enough, for at least the first 2 seasons, the show utilized the services of an educational consultant, most likely to help furnish an essential classification PAW Patrol needed to air, which we'll discuss in a little bit. Ever still, they have this series that's arguably closer in lineage to Beyblade and Bakugan than it is to Bubble Guppies and Blue's Clues. So, why air it on Nick Jr.? I can tell you that that was already accounted for. See, it was circumstantial that PAW Patrol and Spin Master happened to hail from Canada, but most likely if they weren't, the series would probably make a home there anyway. Up north, animation is pretty cheap to make because of the subsidies offered by the government to companies that outsource there. There are also at least 3 main hubs for the animation industry to thrive, as opposed to the main one here being in Southern California. This is why many films and TV shows are filmed or animated up there. Rules for broadcasting content are a bit different too. Canadian broadcast law has always restricted the excessive airing of foreign products, including American. And there are rigid guidelines to qualify co-productions as majority Canadian. In addition to air as preschool content, the series had to espouse pro-social ideals, which is mainly contextualized in how the puppets and help each other out throughout the story. That kind of explains the way the show's dialogue is written, but it doesn't exactly explain the allegations behind it.
Sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
Like its peers in preschool academia, PAW Patrol is party to a lot of publicity and a lot of conspiracy. Many are convinced that it's communist propaganda, or anti-authoritarian propaganda, or even misogynist propaganda. Just any old propaganda under the sun you can think of. But the most egregious claim of them all would perhaps be that it features fascist material. Long ago, this CNN article was tendered by an author explaining the real reason why people ate this up, along with Thomas the Tank Engine. I can't really describe how people reacted to this intellectual think piece, mostly because everyone was too busy writing their own pieces to react to it. Generally, I'd want to compare the backlash it got to the Cartoon Brew article that single-handedly led to the uprising of the Brony community. I think a lot of complaints people have with it are bog standard, but there are gripes to be had with a lot of cartoons out there, including ones to be had with its premise and the lore of Adventure Bay. In fact, some suggestions are downright reasonable or a reflection of the franchise's more undesirable traits. But I think a lot of it verges on how nonsensical the craze is. A more recent article comes from a criminology professor explaining the dangers of the show in an academic journal titled Crime, Conservation, and Corporatization in PAW Patrol. In cases of apparent delegitimization of government authorities and oversimplification of societal barriers, this piece outlines the grim consequences of a fictional dog show selling a bunch of toys. Before the assumptions start flying in, let me just point you in the direction of someone who also has recently revealed to have felt similarly.
I know PAW Patrol is very successful, and I know it is like a big thing with young kids, and I understand it's a big franchise, and I get why it's having a movie. It's very popular. But here's the thing. I don't let, like, so if you watch PAW Patrol, my main objection is I don't think it's right to kind of show basically police propaganda to children and make them unquestionable and kind of set them up to not question what police are doing. It's a problem. They're basically using children and kind of getting them to be like, hey, aren't police cool? Look at these puppy dogs who are police. PAW Patrol is sort of like not good for kids because they don't really understand that is propaganda, and in that sense it's sort of dangerous, and I don't really agree with that.
I wouldn't want to delegitimize the whole argument. There are some fair assessments that were made there. I had a Twitter thread kind of dissecting the main points here and there that I think might be an interesting read. A common thread I noticed with many of the gripes against the show would be the hyperinflation of its world building. Many have said plaintiffs typically take a few stringent observations upon limited screenings and choose to craft a full thesis about the danger that is showed through that. I can't say all of its problems are non-existent per se, but these issues have less to do with the writer's lack of social consciousness and more to do with maximizing the franchise's economic potential. Like every decision they make in terms of world building or story elements are decided not really by the writers, but kind of by the marketers. It's purely coincidental that these plot devices used to justify the series' main story could also point to damaging social perspectives. Listen, as ridiculous as this may sound, I think it's worth asking and assessing whether or not our kid shows can be sociologically aware, or more so, anyway. Problem is, most don't really know how to ask those questions without resorting to flagrant extremes. But really, all of this can probably be explained with one small addendum.
I want to make a video about why, to this day, after the time in history when it was founded, we still need communism.
One of the most pressing topics of discourse within the community would involve assessing a complex task of balancing character interactions in proportion to their overall importance to the show. Hand in hand with its more reasonable critiques, an ongoing discussion is attributed towards the usage of prominent female characters. Aside from the Paw Patrol being predominantly male, its other female characters go underutilized either physically or conceptually. Katie, for example, is a maligned analog to Ryder. She's set up as a somewhat prominent supporting character initially, but after a while, you start to figure out that she's little more than a set piece. Her cat, Callie, tends to have more screen time than she does currently. You wouldn't even know that she's the official town doctor unless you hit up the wiki, because any other time in the show, she's just kind of the groomer, and she washes all these cute animals, and oh, look at her, Fluffy.
Oh my god, it's Fluffy!
Right now, there are 10 or 11 full K9 or K9 identifying members of the Paw Patrol, with an additional one on the way within the next season. Out of them, the main 6 are the ones that compete for the love and adoration of their loyal fans and the big guys in marketing. What most people have noticed up to this point is that typically Chase, Marshall, and Skye get the majority of recognition, and while you can occasionally swap out or accompany the latter with Rubble, Rocky and Zuma are more or less ancillary to the merchandising machine. That's not hard to imagine. I mean, what kid wouldn't choose a fire dog over a recycling pup any day of the week? Granted, they have gotten better with team composition and merchandising, but that's still pretty much the rough structure. The only reason why the girl dog was finally recognized in step with the others was because people lit a fire under Nickelodeon for months at a time. In fact, there's a pretty rigid hierarchy of pups that is expressed inside and out of the show. See, each pup has a number that corresponds to how long they've been a member of the Paw Patrol. Coincidentally, they pretty much allude to their internal rank in the system. Chase, the second member of the team, functions as Ryder's right-hand man, dog,
cat, bear, rabbit thing.
And Marshall, his personal bestie, is third in line. Follow the numbers down and you'll have the rough order of popularity, which also gives priority order to which ones end up on the lunchboxes and the t-shirts. Truth be told, the main discourse lies in which pup is the best. Decidedly, many would go with Ryder's second in command because he's the most utilized and gets to showcase all of this cool gear that he gets. But I would argue that the klutzy fire pup is in fact the most useful engine. Not only is he skilled in martial arts and the only member to date to receive adequate training, but he's generally more popular with American kids than his constituents. His sunny disposition and his humility, despite self-awareness of his mistakes, makes him a much more appealing leader, to the point where the network kind of pokes fun at Chase and his lack of real promise. Not to mention, any pup on the team can do his job, which mostly comprises delegation. Not only because they're all essentially able to do the same tasks, but because they're not as easily sidetracked by the animals that they rescue.
Chase has a super sniffer, and he's a super sneezer.
Achoo! I'm a little allergic to feathers. Achoo!
I think when this series was new, it was easier to market it as cute puppies doing cute things, but this ad in particular was something that they pushed really, really hard in the first few years. It's not only like a running gag in there in the first half of the series, but like outside of it, and I thought that was hilarious, honestly. It was like the go-to for canine comedy that emphasized how not power level the presumed star of this show really is. Well, up until recently, that is. As previously mentioned, Season 4 officially ushered in the first special classification or expansion on the Paw Patrol lore. A batch of episodes subtitled Mission Paw follows the pups on spy-focused adventures in Barkingburg, an analog for Buckingham Palace. With this new theme came not only an onslaught of new toys, but also a subtle change in style and theming. Gone were the days of constant dog puns and simple fixes. Here lies a comparatively complex conflict initiated by increasingly insidious individuals. In summation of the changes made, the writers basically set out to craft a Doggy Avengers, complete with a Paw Patrol cinematic universe. Paw Patrol has been adding new, reoccurring characters since Season 2, but later on there were definitely more stakes involved. More pups were brought on for the sake of advancing the plot, no matter how long they were actually around. The newest theme, Mighty Pups, throws an arguably long-awaited superhero theme into the mix. In its inaugural episode, a meteor crash lands in Adventure Bay and grants the pups and their eventual antagonists temporary superpowers. To raise the stakes, the show introduces Harold, a bratty, more competent nephew of Mayor Humdinger, to make such an upgrade necessary. Whereas his uncle's schemes were typically more petty and smaller in scope, Harold's, while more of the typical campy supervillain ilk, chalk up to more nefarious and dramatic encounters. So far, he's only popped up during these themed episodes, but in contrast to others, he's sufficiently made his mark. A subtle subset of this theme introduces a pair of twin pups without an owner or place of origin inside of a 22-minute episode, only to have them be essentially written out of the show outside of this new themed canon. I haven't been able to verify this manually, but apparently their appearance was hyped up at least half a year in advance, with a whole contest ushered in to name them. To cap off this campaign, the characters were gracefully put on a bus at the end of their premiere episode. They did return a grand total of 2 times throughout the rest of the season. Granted, their premiere came out in the middle of the season, but generally they've been given less use than the last 2 editions. The purpose of the Paw Patrol themed specials is to age with the audience and keep up with future trends. They're okay, they're a means to an end. I noticed, though, that with each new special theme endorsed, subsequent viewings became less and less of a comfy watch. At least for me. It's not really my place to dictate how fluffy a preschool cartoon should be. Nevertheless, I will criticize this move, but not for the reason you think. See, Paw Patrol is already set to be a long runner. By now, there are definitely newer generations that have come and gone into the Paw Patrol fandom, if you will, and as time goes on, the older ones will continue to drop off and the new ones will pick up again. Why not just do the same things over and over? You can try to age with the show and make it more appealing for a longer time, but it might start to alienate the target audience anyway with its complexity. When Nick Jr. series have to level up and add a bunch of new characters and phenomena every season, they tend to fizzle out. That's essentially what happened to 2 of their biggest successes, Dora and Blue's Clues, who, unlike Paw Patrol, had to keep trying new things not only to keep up with the market, but also educational standards. With a feature-length movie on the way, it's already a larger-than-life franchise that doesn't need to be rushed into, but they literally premiered a whole TV movie about racing, so maybe that's a moot point. Hopefully, the upcoming theatrical project can find a balance between sticking to its roots and becoming something more. Overall, the mythos of Paw Patrol is ever-expanding. It's like a giant black hole of content that doesn't ever close. It's a wild ride that doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon. I mean, I'd totally expect that from a show that can easily trump SpongeBob in ratings. Whether you love it or hate it, it's here to stay, and it's kind of enriching to explore and examine it wholesale to review its chronology. For what it's worth, it's a fine series. It's not really educational, but it's far from the worst preschool series for kids to consume at the moment. It'll be interesting to see what it can top in time, or what can top it, but analysts don't foresee another mega hit coming in forever. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Do the pop-pop boogie, shake it, move it, show 'em what you got, that pop-pop stuff. Do the pop-pop boogie, shimmy, groove it, pop-pop boogie, can't get enough, can't get enough. Do the pop-pop